Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of the Midlife Feast. Before I introduce, or I should say reintroduce, my guest, Dr. Leigha Saunders, who many of you will probably recognize. She's been on the podcast twice talking about sleep. She has been a guest expert in the Midlife Feast community a couple of times, talking about hormones and sleep and all things midlife and menopause. But this discussion is a little different. So if you were thinking, oh, this is just another sleep talk, believe me when I say that sleep is the least of the things that we talked about, because we had a really, I think, important discussion about burnout. And we've talked about burnout on this podcast before, but this time we're talking about it in the context of overfunctioning. We're talking about what you can do to maybe prevent it, or how you can put a plan in place so that you don't get to the edges of burnout. And I think it's really important because, as you know, most of the time when we're talking about burnout, we have this idea in our mind of it's when people just collapse. It's when you get to the point of, I can't do anything else anymore, so I'm just burnt out. But it's so much more than that. And I think it's a conversation that we need to have a lot more of. And I'm glad that Leigha and I started this one. So have a listen and check the show notes, because Leigha has shared some resources with us. And let's stop this burnout train. Hi, Dr. Leigha. Welcome back for the third time.
Thanks so much for having me, Jen.
So we've talked about sleep in detail before. You've also been a guest in the Midlife Feast community, which has been amazing. And I'm excited to dive into today's topic, which is a slight kind of offshoot of just sleep, but it's the connection between sleep and burnout. And, as much as we can, relating it to midlife, because that's the stage that most of my audience is in. It's funny because we know that not getting enough sleep, doesn't help us cope, doesn't help us deal with the things that we need to deal with. And we also know that stress and the demands of life can affect our sleep. So it's kind of a chicken and an egg situation for so many people, because I hear it all the time. I know I need to get more sleep, but I have so much to do, and vice versa. So it's not just me that's noticing that, right? It is a two-way street.
It's such a two-way street, such a bi-directional relationship. Absolutely.
All right. So let's just define what is burnout, because it's a word that gets thrown around a lot, but what actually is burnout?
Yeah, great question. And this will catch a lot of people, I think, by surprise at times, because we think of burnout as just feeling really tired and you're kind of done and you need a weekend to recover and be like, okay, that was a tough week. I really had to grind through it. I'm feeling a bit burnt out. All will be good next week. I'll get back on track. But really, in and of itself, when we look at somebody who is in a clinical stage of burnout, and it's also important to note and preface, there's no test, there's no diagnostic test that we can objectively administer and look at and say to someone, it's like, yes, you are in burnout. It's more of a clinical picture in terms of really feeling fatigued and exhausted. So you're just really dragging and feeling like you have to push yourself. And for a lot of my patients, and I'll share my own experience with burnout, this can feel like waking up in the morning, regardless of how well you slept or not, and just feeling this sense of dread. And there's often a lot of emotions that come through. And I was chatting with someone yesterday who was saying, I just couldn't get myself out of bed yesterday and I just woke up and wanted to cry. So those emotions in relation to that physical exhaustion, energy depletion is often the first thing that people might notice or attribute as oh, something's wrong. And then we'll see that there's this increased distance or feeling of accomplishment or appreciation. We start to become resentful or have this almost altered perception of how well we might be performing with our work in particular. And when we use work, if we can apply that to so many different areas. Yes, it might be a professional job, but it might also mean the work that you do as a parent. It might be the work that you do as a child for your aging parents. And caregiver burnout is a very real thing. So we can apply that to more than one aspect. And with that, it's like you're feeling tired, you're feeling this like increased negativity and kind of like resentment or cynicism towards the work that you're doing. And then you start to really question if you're making a difference. And that is where it's like really wears down on your spirit and your soul, because you're like, I'm working so hard, I'm doing all the things, you know, you're depleting yourself in the process, and you feel like you're spinning your wheels and like you're not getting ahead, and the work that you are doing is not making a difference, which then leads into the fatigue and the mental load and the overwhelm, and of course the appreciation and how that shows up in your emotions, and
Yeah.
mental health.
And it's subtle. Like I don't think I've been in full burnout, but I definitely have had a few periods in my life where the people around me were like, "Hey, we need to talk because you're not yourself. You're not coping with things the way that you have before. We can see that you're feeling stressed and anxious." And as a type A overperforming, overachieving person, my first reaction was, "What are you talking about? You're crazy. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine." And I'm like waking up at 3 a.m. and thinking about all the things.
Yes.
And like you were just saying, like spinning my wheels, feeling like I'm never getting anything done. And like it really just felt like quicksand that I was trying not to fall into. Like I was trying to walk on water. Um, but it really took other people, and thankfully I have, you know, lots of people who know me and love me who were like, "Hey, wait a minute, we got to talk." And it was interesting because the time that's most recent that I remember was actually in late perimenopause, which, you know, in hindsight was late perimenopause. It was in the middle of our international move.
Mm-hmm.
And like the 6 months leading up to the move and the few months after, like it honestly felt like I was going to crack open. And it wasn't just stress, it really was burnout from having running a business for so long and then the move and everything. You know, and it wasn't subtle, and yet it was. Like in hindsight I can really clearly see it, but in the moment I think it's really challenging for us to separate out societal patriarchal expectations of what women's work is from clinical conditions of anxiety and stress and perimenopause. And when it all comes crashing together, it's a hot mess, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I would totally agree with that, all of that, and say in hindsight as well, looking back through, even as I shared on the podcast before and many times, my initial sleep struggle. Now that I've experienced and really feel like I'm coming out of another episode of burnout, I'm like, was that first one like like an iteration, let's call it, or maybe like, you know, you're just like in it a little bit, but you are still at a place where you have enough coping skills, mechanisms, supports, resiliency, that even with
Yeah.
at a younger age, right? Like your body is able to respond to stress differently when you are younger compared to as we get older and
Yeah.
as our hormones change and as our stress load increases. And so I 100% agree with looking back and being like, I didn't think that at the time, but now retrospectively, it's quite possible. And
Yeah.
it also took someone else to me more recently to say, like, I think you're in burnout. It was a therapist. And I was like, oh, like it was a total blind spot. And we do that because we just find ourselves in survival mode, right? We are like doing the best that we can. We are absolutely most likely operating in perhaps like old conditioning, or conditioning that comes from like younger experiences or younger parts of ourselves, where we just focus on what has to get done to prove ourselves, to get to the next thing, to accomplish the next thing, to make it happen. And that at times is like very necessary. We have to engage those mechanisms to get forward or meet a deadline, or, you know, meet the obligations and responsibilities that we have in our life that are very real. But when that continues to happen on an ongoing basis, and if you've been, like you said, lying awake at 3 a.m. with all the thoughts in your head, or like feeling like the only time you get a break from those thoughts and that rumination is when you are asleep, and when all you know how to do or think about is work. Again, using that term more broadly in relation to it. Like if it's all consuming, I think those are some really important pieces for people to consider. And with curiosity and kindness and self-compassion to say like, oh, you know what, this is like hitting me in a different place. And I remember hearing the definition, the 3 criteria of burnout before, and I was like, oh, again, it's like me. I didn't even know. I didn't even like realize like those things were starting to creep in. And so it often does take that external perspective. So if this is resonating with you, then you can bring it inward and say like, oh, might I be feeling these things? And how might these things be impacting me, and how I'm feeling and how I'm managing, and of course how I'm sleeping.
Yeah. So, what is the connection with sleep? So, because a lot of people will say, oh, when I was in burnout, I just slept all the time. I know that when I was creeping into burnout, I slept less because I had a harder time falling asleep, staying asleep, which was probably kind of mixed in with perimenopause. But what's the relationship with it? And does not getting enough
Mm-hmm.
increase like the risk that we're gonna? Does it affect our coping?
Yeah, for sure. So if we think about how sleep impacts our nervous system as a whole, like when we get great consolidated sleep that is not interrupted, nice and deep, it's restorative, our nervous system is going to be able to regulate more effectively and efficiently. So we'll wake up with lower baseline levels of cortisol. We'll be able to initiate a normal stress response throughout the day, and that will show up as you being able to respond to stress instead of being like reactive or jumpy or anxious. And then through our sleep, that typically will allow us to then, even later that day or night, fall asleep easily and stay asleep and wake up feeling rested. And so if we are, it's almost chicken and the egg, like you said, like go, really pushing ourselves in the day. If that's the thing that happens first and there's no space for us to decompress our thoughts, feelings, and emotions, if we are always in the going and the doing and skipping meals and not balancing our blood sugar, if we lack the time for movement, and if we're in the throes of a hormone change as well, like PMS or perimenopause, menopause, then all of those things are going to impact our ability to get good sleep. And then create this vicious cycle, because if our sleep is shortened, so if it's less than 7 hours on average, if it's broken and not consolidated, if you're not getting adequate deep sleep, then you're going to wake up in the morning and have a higher baseline level of cortisol. So now you're like buzzing as you go through the day, and smaller stressors are going to seem bigger to you. So your perceived sense of stress is going to be magnified and amplified. And that has such a as I think most people can appreciate, the great impact on their sleep, and not the way that we want. And so in terms of like whether you're sleeping a lot or finding it difficult to sleep, I would probably say there's so many more things we would have to dive into, because when we look at something like clinical depression, which is again a clinical diagnosis, there's perhaps a little bit like easier, more standardized ways to make assessments for that. Often what happens in depression with sleep is there's an increased sleep drive. There's an increased sleepiness. There's an increased desire to sleep. There's an increased amount of sleep that people will be getting, compared to something like anxiety or stress. Really, whether or not you meet the clinical diagnostics for anxiety, there tends to be a decreased ability or a negative impact on sleep. So we'll see that people with anxiety will tend to have lower levels of total sleep time and more fragmented sleep and things like that. So
And
really
there's
it's
so
going
much
to depend where
overlap,
you're at.
right? I mean, like you're going to
Exactly.
have people who have all three, and then
Yeah.
you're going to have people who have any combination. So let's talk a little bit about burnout prevention, because I know for me, that was kind of like top of like the first time I think I was like hinging on burnout. I couldn't do anything about it because it was just related to having like 3 very young children, including a set of twins, and it was just life that was burning me out, right? And I couldn't do anything about that. But what I really took away from the last time was, okay, I need to put steps in place that this doesn't happen again. And so it's really when I started shifting my self-care to be my top priority. So, I describe it as like putting my oxygen mask on first. There's some like non-negotiables now in my self-care that, I know that I need to do. So when it comes to prevention, are there things that we can do when it's not externally caused, or kind of, you don't have a major external contributor? Or even, I guess, if you do, like, what are some of the things that we can do?
Yeah. I would really think about this as like, even if you have that external contributor and we can't shift it that much, right? Like, say you have an aging parent who you're caring for, and that's a role that you have to be in right now. Or if work is stressful and there's not much of an opportunity to switch that around, those kinds of things you can appreciate. So there's almost like a, how do we recover from burnout if the burnout has happened and that stressor is resolved, as well as how do we support ourselves in continuing if we find ourselves like teetering or in the midst of burnout and needing to rebuild ourselves back up. And the first thing is really working with our beliefs and our mindset, like you said, and creating awareness around where where did all of the action lead to, right, to get us to where we are, and what were the beliefs driving that action. And so this can be so fascinating to me because it's on such like a deep level for so many people that we don't even realize that we value productivity so highly it becomes toxic, and then we like push ourselves to do more and be more and produce more because when we were younger we were like appreciated or acknowledged or awarded for getting the good grades or being the quiet well performed girl in school, and then we carry all of those things through to then try to get attention and awards and appreciation from other people, but we end up over functioning. And I see this so often in the women that I work with, and we talk about it in terms of they're like, I'm just doing it all, or I've been taking care of everyone and everything else for the past 5, 10, 15 years. And they find themselves in this dynamic in personal and professional roles where they take on more because they find it maybe difficult to ask for help or receive help because they saw in growing up, it's like a strong woman doesn't need a man, like, or just like
Yeah.
go through and right.
Yeah.
And or like prove yourself too, like life is hard, work is hard, prove yourself, like you're a girl, you can
Yeah.
do anything. But then we've internalized that message as we can do anything, so we have to do everything. And
Yeah.
so then we start like doing more and more and more, and if our partner at work or at home does something, they don't do it to the degree that we like. And so then we criticize them, and then they stop trying because they're like, well, if I do it, you don't even, like, I don't do it right. And then you're like, I'll do it anyways. And so then, like, there's just this whole vicious cycle in which then you do it all because you think it's easier or it's faster. You don't trust anybody else to do it in the same way. And we just want to control the outcomes of, of a certain task or responsibility. And we just struggle to release the reins because we want to be the ones in control. And so I think that piece is like when you can again bring like curiosity and self-compassion to that and be like, whoa, I have been like white knuckling it over here, trying to control it and do it all so it's, quote unquote perfect. And actually that's not working for me because I'm burning out and I can't do it all. I can't overextend myself anymore because I have nothing left for me. I have nothing left for my partner. I have nothing left for my kids. And it doesn't allow you when you overfunction to actually be in your zone of genius and be doing the thing that you want to be doing to your highest capability and level. And so I can think of one patient in particular, we're having this conversation and talking about her overfunctioning in this like masculine feminine dynamic. And she was like, we were exploring how she could alter this in her relationship with her husband and kids. And her husband wanted to help. Her husband's like, I'm absolutely, what can I do to support you? I want to help you feel good and have like for us to have more balance together and for us to feel happier, more connected as a family. And so the solutions are so often there in front of us. We tend to sometimes be again blinded to them or a bit
Mhm.
resistant to them. And so
Yeah.
that piece of looking at your beliefs, being willing to unpack the conditioning, which is the work that I love doing with women, and understanding why our actions have, like, why we are in that action pattern. And then we can say, okay, is that actually working for us? And if it is no longer working for you, no longer serving for you, we get to create a new pattern and a new belief of, I'm so much more valuable than my level of productivity. It doesn't mean you have to quit your job, but it means you don't have to like say yes to everything.
Yeah.
Or as another patient was like, oh yeah, when I'm not on call, I tell the people who are on call, oh, if you need anything, just like give me a call. And what ends up happening, they give her a call or they send her a message. Whereas what we worked on was like, okay, if you take a step back and just say, you're on call tonight, great, I'm unavailable, do you have all the resources you need?
Yeah.
And then that allows that person who's on call, as an example, to step up to their fullest capability and perform. And it also allows her to disengage and recover so that when she comes back to work, she can give to her fullest capability and performance level. And so if we aren't aware of those beliefs first, and if we aren't clear on where we might need to put in some boundaries, we're always going to be overextending ourselves and overfunctioning.
Yeah, the overfunctioning really I know will resonate because it's something that I'm hearing a lot. And I can relate to it too. Just the like, I can do it best, I can do it easiest. It will help others if I do it because I can do it fast, whatever it is. And then yeah, you just end up taking on everything. And we haven't even really talked about the mental load of, especially, women in relationships, of being the person who does the organizing, the planning, the thinking, all of that stuff. So, I mean, there is a lot, but learning to drop some balls is hard. Like, it is hard when you have a pattern of overfunctioning that goes back decades, and of being the person that people expect to overfunction, and someone's just like, oh yeah, just let the balls that bounce drop. It is hard. One of the things that I had to start doing was asking myself, what will happen if I say no? Or what will happen if I don't do this? That was my reality check, to be like, oh, no one's going to die. Okay, we're good. I can say no to this. Because I really needed that reality check, because I was just such a like, yeah, I'm going to do it. Of course I'll do it. Because that's all I knew. So what advice do you have to somebody who is an overfunctioning person in however they show up in the world, is also in burnout, on the verge of burnout, and is really struggling with saying no? Because saying no, I feel like, is like step number one, because you have to take things off your plate. You can't just keep piling on. You can't learn to deal with more stress. Like, that's often what I see is people like, oh, I'm having such a hard time. I need help dealing with stress. But they're just looking to be able to deal with more. They're not actually like seeing that they need to take away.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can ask yourself, I think this is a really important checkpoint, is, does this have to be done, period? Like you said, what will happen if I don't do this? Does this have to be done by me? And does this have to be done by me right now? So those three questions are so powerful. So I'll repeat them. Does this have to get done, period? Because we can create so many stories around like what has to happen. Does this have to be done by me? And does this have to be done by me right now? And that is a really powerful way to filter through what you are going to say yes or no to. One of the other most powerful reference points I've learned through my own exploration in personal development and coaching is a reference to boundaries. And the reference was to say, when you are inclined to do something and you're not sure, like, you have that feeling inside and you're like, do I say yes to this? Do I say no? I kind of want to say no, but I'll feel bad. Or I feel like I have to do this. The filter to apply is, if you say yes, or if you go ahead with doing the thing, is it because you are feeling so full with love and energy and capacity that you're like, yes, I want to give this thing to this person or engage in this action or work because it's like an extension of me and I'm doing it out of love for this person or my work? Or are you trying to do something out of getting love from a
Oh,
person
that is
or
good.
relationship or work, like dynamic? And when I heard that, my psyche, I was
Yeah.
like, okay, here we go. And it's so true though. It's like, are you doing
Yeah.
it because it's actually aligned for you and you're so excited and you're like, yes, this feels right? Or are you like, oh, if I do this, then I'm gonna get, the love, attention, appreciation, maintain the connection. I'm not gonna upset them. I'm not gonna inconvenience them. And that those are the eggshells that we're always walking on. And if we are always walking on them, that's when we at some point will then teeter into full burnout if we're not careful.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So like that just had like a whole bunch of things just went off in my head as we were talking about that, because one of the gifts of midlife, and I've said this before, is that your ability to do the things that you don't want to do just goes. And this is where I think there's a lot of resistance and inner conflict between I've always wanted to be this over functioning person that everyone can rely on and do things, but now I don't want to. And I'm feeling burnt out and I want to change but don't know how. So like that question of like, am I doing this for me or am I doing this for someone else's approval? I think is a fantastic tool to be able to just kind of say, okay, it is time to let that shit go.
Mm-hmm.
Now is the time. Well, at any time really, but because the conversations I have generally are happening after 40 for most people, it's often this like, I just don't want to do it anymore. What's wrong with me? There's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful unveiling that happens of like such a decrease level of tolerance for what no longer serves you and really having an opportunity to step into and move closer to your truest, most authentic self. And that to me is so exciting.
It is. It is. Oh my gosh, this has been an amazing conversation. For anybody who kind of wants to build on the sleep stuff, we have 2 episodes that we're going to put in the show notes. But if people want to learn more about how to work with you and what they can learn from you, what's the best place for them to learn about that?
Yeah. Well, I'm very active on Instagram, so we can connect there. I'm sure you'll link me up. It's easy to find me. And we can link my website in which you can move through a quick discovery session video. And if you feel so called to, apply to work together.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. And if you're up to answering it for the third time, what do you think is the missing ingredient in midlife?
Mm, I forgot that question.
And I didn't warn you.
I know. The missing ingredient. What I hear so many women say, and in the line of recovering from and really working to move beyond burnout, I would say is full permission to experience joy and pleasure in ways that light you up, let fill your heart and let your soul up. And what I see so often in the women who I work with, also who are mostly in midlife, and they come in so exhausted and burnt out and depleted from taking care of everyone else, and they're not even sure what brings them joy or what's fun for them. And I always just extend them a massive permission slip to say, like, it's okay to find the thing, play with the thing, figure out what you love, what brings you joy, what gets you excited, so that you can reclaim that part of you and so that you can live the second half of your life in that joyous, expansive, really excited state as you're letting go of what no longer serves you and really moving to include what does. So,
I love it. I love it. Thank you once again so much for spending this time with us and have a great day.
thanks, Jen.